Anyway, I think this will be the first actual analysis of this.
I think we're gonna be the first actual analysis of this, John. Hey, thanks for joining us today. This is Anthony Parent, and we are doing a special podcast today about the Van. I'm not sure exactly how to say his name. I actually haven't heard of him until this. Roger Keith Vair. We're going to do this on this because here's somebody who's been indicted for tax evasion for not covering one of our favorite subjects, something we were actually discussing this morning, how to expatriate when U.S. person and the problems of having. If you're not a fan of my channel, John is somebody who's been on my channel routinely, and he's been helping out so many people get this stuff right. It's so complicated. It's unbelievably complicated. And so we actually might be the first people analyzing this this indictment for what it is. Now, this is, few things going on here that would surprise people. As number one, I looked at the indictment, and we'll go over those a little bit. But as I look at this, I see that the federal government has a big problem with the indictment, and that is a jury will be confused. A jury won't understand that if you renounce your citizenship, that the United States of America can still indict you for tax evasion. So that's a problem that they have, and we'll see what happens. And there's a lot of questions I have on this as well. But let's get into it. John was actually kind enough to create a presentation, so we're going to head into that right now. Thank you very much for John. Let's go to the first page. I just went through it under a tight deadline. He got it done. So we're going to try to understand this one. Here's the indictment. So, all right, what's the Reader's Digest version? And for you youngsters out there who don't know what Reader's Digest is, well, read a book. All right, let's go ahead.
You're asking me?
Yeah, so we got a Reader's Digest version. Yep.
All right. The bottom line is that he is charged with a number of things, all arising from an allegation that he lied about his assets at the time that he expatriated from the United States in 2014. And that as a non-resident alien in 2017, he failed to file a tax return reporting taxable income as a dividend, I presume, from a U.S. corporation when basically two U.S. corporations that he may be the sole shareholder in, I don't know, distributed some Bitcoins to him. Which he subsequently sold, but that's not the issue. The issue from a U.S. point of view is that he received this from a U.S. corporation. Their view is that it's a taxable dividend and he should have paid tax on that. So it's really, this is about inaccurate reporting of information or non-reporting at two periods, for the 2014 year when he's still a U.S. citizen, and for 2017 when he's a non-resident alien.
And here's the indictment right here that I have up here. The Central District of California, which I guess is because he grew up in San Jose, and I guess that's probably where he was last domiciled. So I assume that's where they have found jurisdiction there. Now, and as I went through this, and there's actually a really good comment that I enjoyed reading from Kim.com, who's friends with them. Here's some background on this, right? Roger Ver, one of the earliest Bitcoin investors, was arrested in Spain for alleged tax evasion. The U.S. government is seeking his extradition. The U.S. Department of Justice claims that Roger underreported the value of his Bitcoin holdings when he gave up his U.S. citizenship of 2014. At the time, Bitcoin was the Wild West of investing. There were no rules and regulations governing Bitcoin. It wasn't clear what the legal status of Bitcoin was. Bitcoin value would vary substantially with any large transaction, crashing the price of Bitcoin. How do you assess the value of such an a liquid asset back in 2014? To now claim a decade later that Roger owes $50 million in taxes to the U.S. government is ludicrous. I have read the indictment, and it's completely novel, unprecedented, and unfair. It's also a hopeless attempt to attach a value to something that was trading in a fragile, volatile, and unregulated market in 2014. Many investment gurus at the time predicted that the total collapse of Bitcoin and that cryptocurrency is not only used by criminals, but as a tool for money laundering, potentially funding terrorism. No investment bank would have touched Bitcoin at the time. How does the US government calculate what Bitcoin was worth in those days of total uncertainty? If Roger would have tried to sell his Bitcoin holdings in 2014, the market would have crashed by 80% or more. How do you fairly assess the value of something that is so new and fragile? The US government doesn't even make an attempt to be fair and balanced. Make no mistake, this indictment has nothing to do with tax evasion. It's a witch hunt against a man who turned his back on U.S. wars and malicious foreign and domestic policy. Roger is a supporter of Julian Assange and press freedom, not just with words, but with actions. He's a popular speaker at crypto events around the world where he educates people about the injustices caused by the U.S. government. Roger spoke out against mass surveillance, endless wars, and the murder of innocent people for profit. He funded many good causes against U.S. imperialism, and that's why they target him. At every opportunity, Roger spoke out about why he left his U.S. citizenship behind, and a wave of successful Americans followed his example. The U.S. government has lost hundreds of billions because Roger was leading the way for many successful entrepreneurs who followed his example. This is a malicious attempt to vilify Roger and to punish him for exposing and opposing the crimes of the U.S. empire. Roger Ver is one of my closest friends, and I vouch for his integrity and exemplary leadership. His empathy for humanity, his efforts to take the world on a path of peace through technology are laudable. He always stood up against evil, and now I would like to ask the crypto community to stand up for Roger Ver. He has done so much for the crypto community with his advocacy and investments. Let's leave our differences about what's the best coin behind and join together to help him. He has played a crucial role in the history of crypto and is deserving of every support. We didn't call him Bitcoin Jesus for nothing. So there's the other side of the story, at least. And what we're and there's really two issues that we need to talk about. First of all, is what is the deal with this exit tax? And I think very briefly you could say, right. So when the United States government considers you to be their property, and because you're leaving the plantation, they're going to force you to make a deemed sale that is a fake sale. There is not an actual sale. They're saying, well, we're going to go to the market and say whatever the market price for your assets are, we're going to value that as if you made a sale. And if you go over $2 million, and there's this exemption on top of it, but if you go over that amount, then an exit tax would be due. Now, there's multiple ways to avoid this exit tax, often trust and gifting. There's ways around it to avoid it with some sophisticated planning. And oftentimes you can plan so well to avoid the exit tax that you actually remove the need to expatriate, because John and I have talked about this multiple times. The top tax haven in the world is the United States of America. By far, there's no information sharing. It only comes one way. The United States collects information from around the world, but for a lot of things, there are ways to have secrecy in the U.S. that you cannot get anywhere else, along with tax loopholes that are unbelievable. And really, when you have someone like Roger, I would be looking for a private placement life insurance as a structure for him that would exempt him from taxation, federal taxation, no matter where he lived, no matter what state. Also would exempt him from state taxation. But here we are. The IRS says, hey, Roger, you didn't pay enough. You didn't value your Bitcoin enough. Now, I think it's really, really, really critical to take a look at the timeline of things. Now, John, do you know what Mt. Gox is?
Say again?
Mt. Gox, MT Gox. Do you have any idea what that is?
No.
Okay. So back in the early days of Bitcoin, and I was an early Bitcoin investor. I think I bought my first one in 2012, and really it was very low. There was really only one place to get it. The only trading platform around was something called Mt. Gox, MTGOX. Okay, that's what it was. It was in Japan. Now, what does Mt. Gox stand for? And you'll never guess it because it's rather insane. It stands for this: Magic the Gathering online exchange. It was a trading platform for collector cards. And that is the most important thing to understand. That is what such a fragile, tiny little market this is, that Bitcoin isn't taken seriously at all. There's no Coinbase isn't around. There's no Coinbase. That's not around. You go to this thing where people buy and sell trading cards, Magic the Gathering. Seriously, that's what it is. That's where you went for it. So that's just something to understand about it. And then, by the way, guess what happened in February of 2014? Mt. Gox crashed. it crashed and took with it the value and certainty of Bitcoin. Let me get it. I think I have a historical chart up here somewhere. Here we go. So I think this is really, really helpful to take a look at. Here is the historical trading chart of Bitcoin from its inception, I guess when it started at $8 back in August 31st of 2011. And when we go to 2014, we could see what it was trading at when it was trading at about $455 USD when Roger expatriated. But that's what it was trading at. But this is the critical thing at the time. And Wired has a pretty good article on this, on what happened in Bitcoin, what happened. But when you look at what happened, is that once Mt. Gox crashed, because I was one of the early adopters in this, and no one knew what I was talking about. They all thought I was crazy. I found other things to get involved with. Don't worry about it. I'm not a Bitcoin millionaire right now. I spent my Bitcoin because I was actually one of the ones who did believe it was going to go to nothing. So the belief was, okay, Bitcoin just crashed and there's really not any place to sell it. There's really not a market for sell it. And now you're going to, back to your presentation. And I think, well, now I just want to give people the historical context of where we are in February, March 2014, when Roger was expatriating, just to say, where were we? That Bitcoin wasn't taken seriously by anybody, and there was really no place you could sell much of it. You could sell small amounts, and you could buy small amounts, but large amounts, there really wasn't a place to do anything with it. And I think that's an important thing to get to. All right, back to your presentation, John. Because I think you have this. So here we go. We want to go over the process here. Thank you for this right here. So these are the issues that pop up, right? With this, the date of expatriation for relinquishing act. Okay, we're going to, and that determining the net worth for Form 8854 purposes. 8854 is the form that you file when you renounce your citizenship. If you don't file one, you have a problem. You're required to file one. And now the exit tax is this blue thing triggering the exit tax for 877A purposes, being a covered expat. We have a lot of content on covered expat on my channel. You want to check that out. Determining the capital gain on the deemed sale. Okay. When was Vera no longer a U.S. person, but his companies still were. Tax, at least according to the allegations. Well, actually, who actually knows? Taxation of distributions of property from a U.S. corporation to a shareholder of the corporation. He did owe taxes. That there is, if there's U.S. source income and you're not a U.S. person, you don't escape U.S. taxes because the income is sourced in the U.S. So there'd still be tax to pay. And then there's taxation of distribution of property to non-resident alien, and that's what he would be at that point. It doesn't live in the U.S. and he's not a U.S. person, so that's called a non-resident alien. Isn't that lovely? And then we're going to talk about the importance of filing accurate returns. So this is the first thing, and I'm glad that at least I was right on this one, because before this I was like, well, what's the date of his relinquishing act? So why don't you walk us through this one, John? What the date of the relinquishing is for him? Yeah,
I found this aspect of the indictment actually the most interesting of all. His mode, at least, again, this is all according to the indictment. I have no idea to what extent this is true or not, right? So to be clear, all we're talking about is the information in the indictment. But apparently, in February of 2014, he naturalized as a citizen of St. Kitts. And he then, a month later, went to the U.S. consulate and said, well, I naturalized as a citizen of St. Kitts. That's a relinquishing act. And apparently they issued a CLN, and this is a month later on March 3rd. And what's interesting about this is that for immigration purposes, yes, he lost his citizenship on February the 3rd. But because this is after the 2008 exit tax rules, his date of relinquishing U.S. citizenship for tax purposes was the date that he actually appeared at the consulate, which would have been March 3rd, right? So what we have here is two separate dates of losing U.S. citizenship for two different purposes. Now, I don't have a sense of this material to the indictment, but I did find it interesting. The indictment says that his lawyers incorrectly advised him on the date of relinquishment. which doesn't really surprise me particularly because this is, a complicated issue. But that did interest me. Okay, so basically, what's happening then is that although the whole discussion of the alleged misrepresentations takes place in the context of February the 3rd, the actual relevant date is a month later, March the 3rd, although the indictment says that it doesn't make a great deal of difference, that, regardless of the date of expatriation, that, there were problems. But I would say to generalize this, okay, and this is something I find very disturbing. When you look online, there's all this, chatter about the date of loss of U.S. citizenship. And the vast majority of people apparently don't understand that there's a difference between the loss of citizenship for tax purposes and the loss of citizenship for immigration purposes in many cases.
Right.
Anyway,
There's
enough on that for now.
two different dates there. But the date that he's concerned for valuing is that March 3rd date is what we want to know. What's the value of?
That's right. That would be
right.
the date for tax.
Right. And, we just got a comment. We got a comment here from Patience is Alpha. Thanks for watching. Could be curious to see his 8854. And as would I. Patience Alpha is saying, well, I bet he put less than $2 million down. I don't think so. I don't think so. And the reason why is I'm going through the indictment, and this is
I don't think it was.
Yeah. I think it's a joke. It seems like tongue in cheek, but it does bring up the point. Is like, well, I'm trying to figure out, well, what did he put down? And the answer is, we don't see it. They don't say it. They don't say what he put down. So what that means is he probably put something down helpful, because the Department of Justice will leave out facts that tend to lead that someone was actually not. If it was a helpful fact, they're not going to put that in there. So, it's sort of it's a very, we have a very vague, and when I read it, it's a long indictment. It's a long indictment, and I would say novel, but it's also not very clear. Well, what did he put down? What's the value? What's the dispute? It's very loosey-goosey here, as the IRS isn't quite sure. That they're not quite sure. They're not alleged. Well, we don't know what it is. So you just put it in wrong, seems to be what they did.
Yeah, so Anthony, here's the problem he's got, right? I mean, I thought the comment you read, from his friend was really, really interesting. I think that this is, my personal view. I mean, I think that the argument that, you can't value these things with any reasonable accuracy is probably a good one. So in other words, I don't see how, the IRS can say, well, the Bitcoin is worth this amount on that day. They might try, but where I think he's got a problem is assuming the truth of this, that over and over, they say that he misrepresented the number of Bitcoin that he actually had. Okay. And that's an issue that's irrelevant to the value of the Bitcoin, right? The value of Bitcoin rather. So, that's an interesting issue.
Well, but the IRS doesn't say what the number is either. So you misrepresented it, but we just know it's not right. We don't know what the number is, but it's not right.
Well, they did say some things though that, who knows if this is true, right? What they said is that he had or controlled 133,000, and that 70,000 of those were apparently owned by his, one or the other, or both of his companies. So,
here it is. Yeah, here we get this. Clustering analysis described below. Okay. Combined with other attribution evidence, establishes that on February 3rd, 2014, defendant Ver owed approximately 131,000 Bitcoins, either directly or through his company. Okay. Well, and then I guess that's how they're doing it. They're saying, well, this clustering analysis is used from the blockchain to group Bitcoin addresses together into clusters based on co-spending. Co-spending occurred when multiple Bitcoin addresses sent Bitcoin into a single transaction, indicating that a single owner held the private keys for all of those addresses. Cluster could be labeled based on its root addresses, namely the earliest existing Bitcoin address in the cluster. So, this is going to come down to, because the IRS is trying to prove something, with circumstantial evidence. It's a clustering analysis, but things like this, there's probably another side to the story. And by the way, if somebody is an expert on clustering analysis, if someone would have a different opinion, I'd love to hear that about what this is. But this is what they're just sort of saying. I don't necessarily trust the government on this, though. I'll be honest. I really don't trust them because they're looking to get somebody. They're looking for a target. And I think that's what we're seeing here. They're looking for a target. And now, this is 10 years after the fact, too. 10 years after the fact, they're so desperate to find somebody. Well, they got, they looks like they got somebody good enough. But I mean, they're going to have to prove this. I mean, this is going to be a very difficult thing for them to prove. And by the way, John, now he's in Spain, I guess, right now.
Spain.
And Spain, I'm going to imagine I imagine in Spain it is an extraditable offense, tax evasion. But in this case, my argument, would you have an argument? Can you think of an argument against extradition?
Well, Spain so there's, broadly speaking, there's two kinds of extradition treaties, right? There are the older ones that, where you extradite somebody based on a very specific offense, say tax evasion or something. The newer ones, the majority, are what are called dual criminality treaties. And what this means is that all the U.S. has to do is allege facts which are criminal in the United States. And as long as those facts are, this is a bit of an overgeneralization, but criminal in Spain, even if it's not the same kind of crime, then it would be indictable. It is. I'll tell you what I did find interesting about it, though, was, somebody contacted me about this at 5 a.m. this morning. And the question actually posed to me was, how does nationality factor into this? And what is interesting is that this particular extradition treaty allows either country to not extradite its nationals. So, if he'd been a Spanish citizen, that might have been helpful. And it does seem to me, though, that, in thinking about expatriation and that, I don't know. I mean, for a certain kind of person, I think it might be reasonable to look at extradition treaties, where you think you're going to live, right?
I mean, really, right? I mean, that's something to think about if you're going to go do this and you are afraid of
tax treaties. I mean, I find it frankly amazing that, he keeps his U.S. companies. I mean,
yeah.
That I think is just, I mean, if you want to get out from under the U.S. regulatory regime, I mean, you don't perpetuate conditions that give them regulatory authority, right? I would think, but.
Well, I mean, and who really knows? Hey, look, I've looked at a lot of indictments over the years, and things sometimes they're quite imaginative. And who really knows in this case? And it's going to come out.
Two companies, Memory Dealers and Agile Star, right? At some point they claimed they're U.S. companies. They certainly existed when he was a U.S. citizen. I mean, I think the chances are quite good they are. By the way, there was another interesting thing that jumped out at me. This is something I don't think we've really ever discussed in our podcast, but when he was a U.S. citizен, these were being taxed as S corps, okay, because he was a U.S. citizen. But to be taxed as S corp, it has to be U.S. citizen shareholders. So when he relinquished citizenship, they automatically became C corp.
C corp, right?
Tax purposes, right?
So right, and so I mean, so an important thing is like this. So perhaps the IRS deemed him to take constructed dividends. That is, he didn't take dividends. So we actually don't know, because you're absolutely right that it has to be a C corporation because he's no longer a U.S. person. The flow through is only available if you're a U.S. person. So you gotta have to wonder. Well, maybe they were just sitting on something, and then somebody came. Oh, you should have really made a constructive dividend. So again, constructive dividend is a dividend that doesn't happen. A deemed sale is a sale that doesn't happen. So the IRS, our tax code involves a lot of fictions.
Yeah, okay.
You got to create a lot of fictions to make this thing work, huh?
Okay, but look, whether true or not, right? I mean, let's just focus on the allegation. The allegation was that for 2017, Bitcoin owned by the company was distributed to him, right? So presumably the argument is that under Internal Revenue Code 301, that's a dividend, okay, to a non-resident alien. I mean, that's the base.
Yeah, we'll find out, right? I mean, I think we'll find out. Here's a comment here. He's not been a citizen for U.S. U.S. citizen for 10 years and is arrested just 3 weeks after publishing hijacking Bitcoin. Seems that the information presented in the book bothers the government.
I suspect that's a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, we do know and I think we do know how vindictive the government is, and we've talked about we've talked about Julian Assange on our channel here before, and we know how brutal and vindictive they are. So probably very true. All right, so we're going to move back. Let's go back to your presentation here. And
what's interesting, Anthony, is we don't know what's going on clearly, and I want to emphasize that all we're talking about are the facts in the indictment, which is an allegation. I don't know this guy. I don't believe you know this guy.
I don't know him. Yeah, I didn't even hear of him, and I'm not a big crypto guy.
I'm not taking a position on whether he did or did not do anything. Okay, all we're doing is just analyzing, the world according to the government, right?
Well, yeah. I think So we probably, let me just say he does have. Let me get his. I'll just get a link to his book up here. I'll put this. But yeah, the book looks like it's well reviewed. So, great point there. On this here, it's a well reviewed book that he has. Hijacking Bitcoin. So yeah. Good. Well, here's a great way to get some attention to this book, right? A great way to get it. I think maybe I'll get it too. Very interesting.
Well, now that I had to torture myself by reading the indictment, I'd rather read the book, I think.
Yeah.
But the indictment is much longer than it has to be. Really the allegation is that he lied, that he misrepresented the amount of Bitcoin that he had and the value at the time that he expatriated, and that he didn't report as a dividend the transfer of Bitcoin from the U.S. corporation to him, a non-resident alien, in 2017. That's basically what it is. Now, I think that, I'm just guessing, right? But I think that being able to value, when you look at the valuation of these things for expatriation purposes, the commentary is absolutely correct that you look at it, from the point of view of the value in 2014. The government is largely using revisionist history, to go back 10 years and say, well, now with the vantage point of 10 years, this is what we think it was worth. And this is why, if you read the indictment, it's just chock full of suggestions that he was dishonest with his lawyers, dishonest with his tax preparers, all this kind of stuff.
Right, but it's not. But there's no specifics, and it's just and I'm reading this, and I can, as a lawyer, and I'm reading it through that lens. Like, okay, I'm asking for a client for the valuation, and I'm trying to figure out what I would do differently if he was my client back in 2014 to say, okay. What you got for Bitcoin? Oh, I have a bunch. Like, all right, yeah, but you can't sell it. Like, no, I really can't. Like, yeah, man, Mt. Gox just crashed. Yeah, so let's try to put a value on it. We know it's worth something. What
you're describing is the precise reason for valuation discounts generally, right? In the world of gifting, right? If there's no market for it, or if it's a joint interest.
Right, and I guess in this case we have a U.S. government that doesn't know valuation discounts exist. They don't know that.
They know.
They and apparently that what they also don't know is that the exchanges that exist in 2024 didn't exist in 2014. They don't seem to know that. Very interesting.
We agree. I think anybody who ponders this reasonably for just anything more than about 30 seconds, I think would find the argument that it's difficult to value the stuff. I think they would find that persuasive, right? And that is why, unless he claimed it was under 2 million, right? Regardless of the value, I think the guy's got over 2 million. And this is why they hammer away time after time after time that he misrepresented the number of Bitcoin.
Right.
Right. That's why they hammer away at that.
Right, but in order to get a fraudulent number, they're relying on a cluster analysis, which I'm not going to believe is,
Well, that may well be true.
Good luck.
So there's two issues here, right? I mean, if you're trying to defend this thing, you defend it on the basis of the valuation, and you defend it on the basis of the numbers, right?
Yep.
I mean, it seems to be the valuation thing is probably easier to defend. But I don't know. I mean, by the way, I've never had I don't know the first thing about Bitcoin. Okay. So, I mean, I see this in, probably the most simple, mindless terms. I mean, I'm not confused by the technology of what's going on reading this. Okay. I mean, I see this very, very simply. What they're saying is that he didn't properly disclose his assets. His assets were over 2 million. Therefore, he didn't report enough deemed income. Therefore, he didn't pay enough exit tax. And that's what's happening in 2014. In 2017, he received this stuff out of the company. He didn't report it. Therefore, he didn't report a dividend. I mean, that's, yeah,
right. I think the only thing you need to know about, the only thing that you would need to know about cryptos to help you understand this indictment is number one, there was no market for it. And there really wasn't a big market for it in 2014. It was volatile. And an immature market, and then you just need to know what this cluster analysis is. What do you mean by that? Other than that, this is what you just said: a claim that you undervalued your assets, and you undervalued and underquantified your assets.
Well, but that's exactly what the claim is. Now, let's look at this being a criminal case, right? And we have a higher standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I think the issue here is, does this, whatever this cluster analysis is, 10 years after the fact, that is interpreting it 10 years after the fact, does this meet the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt? I think that.
I don't think it is. I'm going to drop Kim.com's into my Twitter feed right here, so you'll see that. Just you guys go to that. It's a really, I think it's a really thoughtful thing to do. All right, so let's go back to your let's get back to your presentation.
All right, so we've talked about the date of expatriation. I find that personally very interesting. I suspect most people don't. So let's move on off that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So
this is right. And so this is the date, March 3rd. So we want to know, and really, it's the deemed sale of all his Bitcoin on March 3rd is what we want to know. Which
he's deemed to sell it the day before while he's a U.S. Under the Internal Revenue Code. The asset valuation is the date of expatriation. The IRS commentary says the day before.
Okay.
There may be people who are impacted by that problem. But.
So again, right? And when you deem a sale, the IRS wants to deem a sale, but then it wants to deem a fake. So the IRS creates a fake sale. And now they want to create fake circumstances around the fake sale.
Well, they want to create contrived value, a fake
right. Right. Like, well, we're going to pretend that you sold it, and we're going to pretend there's a market for it. And now, therefore, you lied on your form. You lied on your valuation.
So that's exactly what they're doing, but they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Maybe we should give a context here. I mean, let's say that, let's say it's an indisputable fact that you paid. This, I would think, would be an indisputable fact. If you paid $100 for a Bitcoin, okay, you bought a Bitcoin for $100. That's a fact, okay. Now, so we're going to pretend you sold that on the day before you expatriate. Okay, so let's say it's worth, Now the question is, what is it worth? I don't know how you determine the value of Bitcoin. At that time, I don't know how you do it, but I mean, let's just imagine that you could get that there was some consensus that maybe it was worth $1,000. So what they're claiming is that he should be paying a capital gains tax on a gain of $900. That's just help people understand how this works. So so it's a fake it's a fake sale. So it's fake income based perhaps on a real acquisition cost, but definitely a fake sale price, right? Because nobody can know, really where it came from. I mean, if it's on the New York Stock Exchange, all you do is you look up, because that's a public, that's a different kind of thing. You look up what were they trading on that day, right? or if it's part of a mutual fund. These are things you look up online, and because they're regulated, I mean they have these are defensible values. But something like Bitcoin, I see as more like real estate, right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think that is a good way to put it. Well, now here's the other thing too. Inside now, again, at the time, Mt. Gox was 70% of the online trading of Bitcoin. Okay, now, and they lost $460 million, right? So that's how tiny this market is. And so, yeah, if you're trying to sell $5 million of Bitcoin in such a tiny market, you don't have $5 million of Bitcoin. You don't.
Right. Well, let's look at it. Many years ago, I once owned a condominium and a project that was going south very, very quickly. And to go back to my analogy of this should be treated like real estate and not as a stock. And what actually happened was that because of a bunch of circumstances, everybody wanted to sell at once, right? And the problem with that type of thing, like a fungible asset, meaning one is the same as the other, is that when you have a huge number of people selling, each one is only worth what the last one went for, right? So it puts tremendous downward pressure on prices. Anybody who's had to sell in a bad real estate market would know.
Right, and I mean, we're in a situation. I mean, this is a pretty gutsy, call by the Department of Justice. You're saying someone had a specific intent to defraud you when there was no way they could make the sale that you claim they could do. There's no way that they could do it.
Look, the position of the U.S. government, regrettably, is that all American citizens are criminals.
Right.
Okay. I mean,
the full assumption.
Look at the whole FBAR requirement. I mean, I like you. I wrote a submission, okay, on the FBAR thing. Mine was a little different. My point was that to require FBARs from Americans abroad is to require FBARs from people who have absolutely no connection to the United States, but somehow not require them from people who stay there 120 days every year. Camping out as possible criminals, etc. I mean, it's bizarre. And the only way this can be justified is if there's something about being an American that creates a presumption of criminality, terrorism, money laundering, right? I mean, that's the view of the U.S. government. You're born in the U.S., you're a presumptive criminal.
You are a presumptive criminal. Yeah, what John was referencing is that for some of you not familiar with our channel, report of foreign bank accounts is a requirement that if you don't file when your accounts are over $10,000 in the aggregate, the IRS, by the way, it is a criminal form. It says Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So it's a criminal form, but guess what? The civil agency at the IRS is the one who administers the penalties. These people aren't attorneys. They don't know the first thing about they don't know the first thing about the states of minds required for willfulness. So it's a criminal form that the civil IRS develops, and then, as I've commented, that there's actually no law that justifies it. That it's all made up, and yet the FBAR is going around destroying it. And because again, the government really looks at us as the enemy, and by attacking people, it gets them to behave a certain way. And I think that's really the purpose of this indictment. The purpose of this indictment is to scare the living everything out of people who are thinking of expatriating and then have Bitcoin, so that you just run and over comply, whatever it costs, and you stop thinking critically. That's the whole point. The entire point of this is so that you stop thinking critically. And you just sort of, okay, there's the scary government. And, that's what John and I spend so much time doing, peeking behind the scenes. And we often find, the emperor has no clothes. And the reason why we're doing that is that we're not so, intimidated by them. They don't understand their own laws. We tend to understand them better than they do. But it's all a psyops to keep us compliant and demoralized. And this is a great example of, how they're doing it here.
I think, Anthony, that this actually is a really good argument for renouncing U.S. citizenship.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, this is really bad stuff, okay? And it's clearly a drive-by shooting. I mean, it's aimed at generally, make sure you file your 885-4 Act. I mean, by the way, to be clear, I am sort of the old school camp, okay, that believes that if you file forms, they should be accurate, okay?
I'm of that too. Yeah, we do. Yep.
I think that, that's perhaps one lesson here. But there's another thing here that, I mean, what if the guy had never filed anything? He just renounced his citizenship, right? From that point on, he's no longer a U.S. Tax subject, what have you.
Well, and John, thank you for that, because that is often
Trouble
that's
here.
that's often I know, and I've talked to a lot of people around the world with substantial net worth, and they just stopped filing, and they wanted to talk to me like, oh, I kind of want to be curious about what's required to sort of be in compliance again. And I talked to them, and they say, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you later. And so this is absolutely, that the government has this perverse incentive to say, well, you know what, just don't file anything. You're always better off. And I mean, that's honestly the truth with FBARs, by the way, because somebody was asking me this question the other day, about how, if I had clients who were assessed FBAR penalties, and the answer was yes, but only in the cases of opting out of an OVDP. That is, we were the ones to raise our hand and say, hey, we have a missing FBAR and we think we should be entitled to a lower penalty. The IRS doesn't find people, but rather it hammers on the people who disclosed to say, oh, you didn't do it quite right. But whereas you file nothing, it's hard for them. It's a lot more work to do for them to kind of come up with,
I think that's, and also what's interesting is on the 8854, I'm not saying this is the only thing that could happen, but it is interesting to me that there's a $10,000 penalty prescribed for not filing, right?
Yeah. Pay the penalty. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I mean, here you've got Stephen's comment. The government is trying to silence Roger Ver, just like they did before.
Yeah.
I think they're trying. Well, I would go further, Stephen. I'd say they're trying to silence Roger, and they're also trying to silence you. That's what this is about. Everybody. We're all okay now, because here's the other problem too, is that now every tax professional is aware of this one. Now they're all going to, hold on a second. And invariably what will happen is many tax professionals will overestimate and will overpay what someone is worth, because they're going to look at this indictment as a reason why they need to overpay to the IRS. And that's
you may be right, you may be wrong, okay, on that. But look, there's no question that, people need to understand the compliance industry, made up of accountants, lawyers, what have you, as mostly representatives of the IRS, mostly.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, they're obviously willing to do what they can for you, within limits, but they're not. I do not think. I think there are some who are committed to doing the best they can for people, but I think that for most of these people, they'll do the best they can for you up to the point where they think that it could cause a problem for them. Right.
And then you're right. And then they will make sure that, right. So they're there to protect themselves first, not actually advocate.
That's probably human nature. Okay.
And that's human nature. Right. And so it's hard to find, hard to find tax professionals who look at the IRS as the enemy. Well, that's what it's hard to find. All right. So we've went through the determining the net worth for purposes, and our date should be March 3rd, 2014. A little typo, but you were
what did I do?
You have 2024.
Maybe I can,
because it is. Well, I mean, you're aware of the current year. That's a good sign, my friend. And now we have determining net worth, and this is part 2 of 2. So we're on the form itself, and this is where it goes. Thank you for putting that. Are there different parts this goes? We'll see. We're just okay. All right. No, this is where your net worth goes on your form 8854. And that's we don't know what it is. We haven't seen it. It would be, and I would love to see it. It would be very, very.
Where would that go on the form?
No. I'm saying I said we haven't seen his form. It would be wonderful to see it. Where would see here? Where do we put this down? Where will we put Bitcoin? If this is 2014, where do we
Probably
put
19, probably line 19,
other assets? Yeah, right. Right. You got to love it, right? This asset that you substantially undervalued goes another. Yeah, we don't even have a classification for it, right? Right? I mean, kind of crazy. You don't even have it, but you're like, oh, yeah, better get it right. But it's not even,
Well,
they don't have it broken down.
well, you put it under other assets. I mean, what it is, it's treated as a form of property. It just is not one of the forms of property that's listed specifically on one of the lines, right?
Yep. All right, let's move on here. And now we get to this part of the form. We get to this is the part of 8854 triggering the exit tax here.
8854, where essentially they look and where you're telling them whether you're a covered expatriate or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's three ways you can be a covered expatriate as a general principle: net worth over $2 million, average tax liability of more than $190,000, and not certifying 5 years of tax compliance. You'll notice also, though, I mean, look, what if Mr. Ver had been born a dual citizen? Was a dual citizen from birth? He'd be out of the whole damn mess, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Isn't that
right?
interesting?
Right. If he was, yeah, that's right. We did a topic on that. If
he should, maybe he should see who his parents were. Maybe in fact he has a claim to some other citizen.
That would be amazing defense if that actually is how it turned out.
Living in St.
I happen to be a dude. I forgot to tell you guys that, right? Oh my God, that'd be great.
He probably doesn't know about it, but
yeah, maybe, yeah.
It apply to him because of the tax residency problem. But there's a lot of people who don't know about that exemption, right?
That's right. It's a very that if you were born a dual citizen from birth, you have more rights than other people.
Well, that's exactly right. The tax code is created in the United States what I would call a caste system of citizenship, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Where people who are dual citizens from birth are without a doubt preferred citizens. They're better people. They have better privileges.
Yep.
And that's I find that very interesting because that's the simple fact. But yet, the U.S. preaches this dogma of equal citizenship for all. What a bunch of garbage!
It is right, and John and I, we haven't done it yet, but we are going to. We got to do our podcast on the real Constitution of the United States of America. The Bill of Rights means nothing when confronted with the income tax. The Bill of Rights gets thrown away, and it got thrown away immediately in 1791. By the way. 1791 is when the Fourth Amendment expired. Didn't really have it was there for, I guess, until the very first law was passed by our government. The Fourth Amendment was in existence, but the first excise tax of 1791 destroyed the Fourth Amendment. So it's always been sort of a bit of a PR. It's PR more. Our Bill of Rights is more PR by the Federalists than actually delivering any protections. Now, in the 8854 here, what we're looking at. It's in underline 1 is where you put in your income, because if your income is averaging over $190,000 per year, you're a covered expat.
Not income tax owed to the U.S. government.
Income tax owed, okay. And then line 2, so it's either one of these two is what will. Oh, actually, all of these could trigger it, because if you say,
well, if you look at 1, 2, and 6, right?
1, 2, and 6. Okay, 1, 2, and 6 will. Okay, great. So that's how you trigger being a covered expat, and I do have a video on that. I'll put that in a link for those of you who want to know what a covered expat is. I have a little bit longer video on that to explain it. Or it's actually not that long.
To be clear, were we talking about this morning? I think we were talking about this.
We were talking about it this morning, yeah.
It seems so familiar to me all of a sudden.
Yeah.
To be clear, the fact that you're covered expatriate does not necessarily mean you're going to pay an exit tax.
Right.
It depends on your circumstances.
Right.
But it does create the covered gift problem.
Right. Which we've gone over before. We've gone over the covered gift problem as well. I'll get a link to that. I'll get a link to that covered expat, because if you expatriate and you give gifts, you can have a problem. Just like an unbelievable. That's the family that stays together should. Right, we did a video on that. Yeah, that
together bonds together. Okay.
Yeah.
But okay. Now, just one comment on this. It wasn't clear to me. from the indictment, really. But if you look at the 8854, when he's listing his assets, no need to go back there. But so he has Bitcoin he owns personally, but he also has his company's own Bitcoin. To be clear, it's his share in the companies that is his property, not the Bitcoin owned by the companies. Okay. Now, I'm not sure exactly how that factors into the analysis, but I do think it's worth noting.
Well, that's a great point because, the indictment says, well, he owned 100 between his companies and himself. He had 130,000 Bitcoin. Well, but we just said that those are owned by the company. He has his shares in the company, but he doesn't own those actual Bitcoin. The corporation does. So that's not even,
so it affects his net worth, via his ownership of the share in the corporation. But let's pause for a minute and say, now we have to look at the fair market value of the share in the corporation. If that share in the corporation is it owns assets, a lot of building capital gain, that's going to discount the fair market value of the share in the corporation because nobody's going to pay you, the value of nobody's going to pay for a share in your corporation if the share owns a lot of assets with built-in tax liabilities, right? I mean, it's going to have to be discounted.
Oh, well, that's a great point because he did buy he was an early adopter. So, I mean, most of that's going to be gain at that point because
I'm just saying that, this is not so simple as they make it out. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway.
So we got through. All right. So we did cover did we cover this? Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. Moving on here. All right. Right. And here's a point. He was not.
Anthony, so what we've done here, let's just pause for a minute and where we are in the story, right? So at this point, we've kind of talked about what was happening when he was a U.S. citizen. All right. And the problems that they're alleging when he was a U.S. citizen, specifically underpaying an exit tax and in inaccurate form 8854. After March 3rd, 2014, he's a non-resident alien. From this point on, he himself is not subject to, a lot of this U.S. regulation, but his companies are under U.S. jurisdiction. And this is what's planted the seed, right, of the 2017 problem. If the companies were not U.S. corporations, then he wouldn't have at least the 2017 problem. And I think that's, I think that's an interesting point. And I think that, people considering expatriation may want to keep that in mind. I mean, there haven't been a lot of prosecutions on this, but I think it's worth keeping track of some of the possible lessons. Okay. You want to get out of the U.S., don't leave a bunch of stuff behind in storage.
And so here we got the indictment. I did share that. The press release I did not share.
The press release is very confused.
Imagine that. Yeah.
I'm not sure who wrote that, but I mean it's not inconsistent with the indictment, but it's not as clear. That's for sure.
Yeah, they do. These press releases they create. Sometimes they do take some creative steps there to try to paint this as and this is the thing too is you have to understand that government doesn't really care if it collects any money. Doesn't care. The entire purpose of every criminal indictment is the press behind it. That's the entire purpose. Mr. Vander is a great person to go after because, hey, look, we're talking about it, right? You're talking about it. So this is the kind of person the IRS wants to go after. If you would make a good headline, then you will be a person who will get tax justice, DOJ style, right? And if you're somebody who's like, I wouldn't really make a great press release, you could really do anything you want. You really could because they don't really have any interest because no one's going to care. And this is really the point that we have a tax code that is so monstrous that the U.S. The government wants to impose worldwide, which it does, and it can't do everything, and it doesn't have the staff. It has the IRS, and by the way, separating some of the fact from fiction about what people are saying about the 87,000 new IRS employees, it's actually where their staffing is. It's actually still lower than it was in 2011.
Look, Anthony, if we really strip this case down to its bare essence, if somebody said, "What's this case really about?" Okay, I would answer it in two ways. There's less going on than I think they're trying to make it out. The first is, okay, that when he was a U.S. citizen, he did not report the full extent of his Bitcoin holdings. Okay, that seems, to be an allegation that may be provable. Okay, that may or may, I think it's more likely to meet the reasonable doubt standard than some of this other stuff. The second thing is simply that he may have received, the allegation is that he received dividends from a U.S. corporation that he didn't report to the IRS. Okay.
Yeah, but the silence, I understand, but as I read, when you read what's missing in an indictment, that's where what's not there. We don't have a lot of hard facts here at all. And I would actually say he's in a great position to defeat the 2014 charges. I mean, I think they're really out of their mind, and that not only does he have to understate it, he has to know he's understating it. So he has to specifically know he's understating something that really
agreed. To me, the criminal charge. Another thing that's interesting is this, right? So there should have been a withholding tax, right? The company should have been required.
Yeah.
And you wonder why. Maybe they should have gone after the companies, right? Why don't they just go after the companies for the tax? You don't forget about him, right? I mean, this is really interesting overreach, right? The companies were at fault here in not withholding it on a dividend, right? So I mean, we've got a 30% withholding on the dividends, right? Unless he files a W-8, to get. Now, I looked at the U.S.-Japan tax treaty when putting this together. And if he's in fact living in Japan, I don't know where he was living, but I mean, there's a suggestion he was living in Japan, then that would have been a 15% withholding under the treaty, right? But anyway, I don't know. I mean, I would have expected them to just go after his companies, right, for the tax.
Yeah, right. They didn't do that though, right? Because that's not the headline.
They are. I don't know, but
yeah. I mean, I think this case demonstrates, really, so much about what we know about the IRS that this is that they've been saying, oh yeah, we want to go after cryptos. Now, of course, they don't have the budget to do so. I mean, that's the thing. The upshot, the upshot of all of this is it really shows you how little power the U.S. government has, because if they had actual power to administrate the tax code, they wouldn't need to do this. They wouldn't need to do this. If the tax code was actually something that was understandable, was actually something that we wanted, they wouldn't need to do this. But they need to do this because nobody wants it. They lie to us about what it is. They invent laws that we never asked for. Who's the constituency? I want to know who is the constituency who called their congressperson and say, you know what? I want you to ruin me. I want you to ruin me. I want to make sure you ruin me if I don't do everything your way and hand over all the money that you ask of me. I want you to financially ruin me. And when you ruin me, can you please do me this favor? Can you please do this favor? Don't send me a bill. No. What I want you to do is make this process so agonizing for me to figure out a bill where I need two different attorneys, two different tax preparers. I can get different opinions from everybody. That's what I want. I want to be so hammered. And if I decide to leave the United States because the tax code is so punitive, what I want you to do is to punch me. That's what I want you to do. Now, can you think of anyone in the world who would ask to be demanded to be treated like this? And the answer is no, because we didn't ask for it. It's all a lie. It's all been foisted upon us. The tax code doesn't have our consent whatsoever. And yet we're told it is. And that's why they have to lie to us and rule by fear and intimidation. And where I would say, the best, one of the best ways that I find it is what John and I talk about is when you file a return, make sure it's right. And then what's critical is when you creating good books is often the key to getting a great outcome. And many times people have accused me of being an IRS whisperer, being able to get results no one else can. The fact is that's not really true. What I do is I get the proper support to go in to know that they don't really have much of an option with the support. That's the way you win. with great, solid books, and that's how we like to help people a lot too. And it's gonna be interesting whatever happens in this case. It is going to be interesting. But what would you say the the biggest key takeaways here are, John? What would you say?
Well, I put some possible conclusions in the handout.
Oh, right, yeah. Let me get that back up.
Let's see what they were. I mean, I think there's a few of them.
It wasn't, or was it the end? Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, geez, yeah. We keep going, yeah.
No, go down to the end. Keep going.
Oh, here it is. Filing there and filing accurate.
Oh yeah. By the way, what's interesting also, there was a gift tax return issue in this as well. What he did was, what is he alleged to have done? Was that in 2010 or 11? Well, in 2016, what he did was he filed a late gift tax return for a gift in 2010 or 11 to somebody of 25,000 Bitcoin. I mean, the suggestion was that this was an attempt to try to justify his net worth, being below 2 million. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know what Bitcoin was trading? Bitcoin was trading for $5 back then. So yeah, okay, it was $125,000 gift. Yeah. So it's really cute what they're doing.
Well, what I'm here, Anthony, is just sort of standard expatriation planning as well.
Yeah.
But and that, by the way, was another thing. A third misfiling he was accused of. But my thoughts when I put this together, go down to the last slide. I mean, just some general possible conclusions. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. And I think that these are fairly minimalistic conclusions. Okay. The first is, it's pretty obvious that some expatriation returns are being audited. Okay. It's pretty obvious that some are. Most aren't, I don't think, but some are. Okay. So I think you need to pay attention to that and filing the return. Secondly, I really think the worst thing people can do is file inaccurately. I think that's the worst thing you can do. And we see this here again. Notice that the whole thing is based on he was inaccurate in this and that and the other thing, right? But anyway. U.S. source income is going to keep you involved with the IRS to some degree, right? And this depends on what stage of life you're in. Obviously, maybe you've got U.S., but for these younger people who are just fed up with America, just cut all ties, okay?
Yeah.
Don't keep anything there that they still have jurisdiction over. I'm very interested in the whole extradition question. I've been interested in this for a long time. The Meng Wanzhou thing, in Canada, the Julian Assange thing, the abuse of these extradition treaties. But once again, we see the use of extradition as a tool in the whole process. And, when people think about expatriation, it may well be worth considering where you're going to live, what your nationality is going to be, because there are countries that won't extradite their nationals, to the United States, but that does, unfortunately keep you in those countries, right? Et cetera. But, worth considering and what kinds of tax treaties, may exist with these countries for information exchange, et cetera. But, after having thought of those sort of four objective things, the way I was feeling after reading this, and this has been my life today, because we started out, with something this morning, is that, I think that maybe a way to view the exit tax is that it's simply an investment in your future, like anything else. Some people buy 1,000 shares of a stock because they think it will benefit them in the future. Some people will pay an exit tax because they think, maybe the way to view this is be happy you can leave it all. Because, this country is getting so tyrannical that and we're beginning to see impediments on leaving. The first is the law that you have to have a U.S. passport to leave. Now, that, as far as I know, is not being enforced, but it could be enforced. Okay. Nobody can get on a plane if they're a U.S. citizen without showing a U.S. passport, right? We have that in place, right? we have laws in place where they will, restrict or confiscate your passport if you have IRS debts.
Oh God, right? Yep, right. I mean, there's no. I mean, right.
Going? Where is this going? I mean, what's to stop them from just putting up a wall? In 2012, Ron Paul commenting on, I can't remember who was it that, talking about a wall or something, said, well, sooner or later, these walls are going to be used to keep people in. Everybody laughed at him, but I think he was absolutely correct. Okay. I think that we're going to see pressure, to prevent people from leaving the country. And just yesterday, and I tweeted this, there was an article in the Christian Science Monitor about, the staggering reduction in the number of U.S. students who are studying in China, down to just a couple hundred a year. And, to some extent, this, as I understand it, is the result of, not getting funding or approval in programs and stuff like that. But this is just one more example, isn't it, right, of, pressure to keep people in. So I don't know. I mean, I think the people who are serious about getting out probably should get out, okay? Because I just would not, put it past countries, including the United States, to gradually put up barriers to exit. I mean, they're not going to do it overnight, right? But, we see one thing after the other after the other.
Yeah.
My final conclusion,
yeah, go ahead.
the most important is this. Never underestimate the joy in being poor, okay? And never underestimate the cost of being rich. I mean, honestly, I think that what true freedom and wealth is in this chaotic world we're living in is the ability to be happy on small amounts of money. Because if you don't have a lot, there's not a lot they can take. And if you're happy in that situation, oh my God, that is the gold standard in life.
Now you're really infuriating him. You don't have anything and you're happy. Now they're really
Oh my God.
Now they don't know what to do. Now that, I mean, that's,
5 years from now, the United States is going to establish a maximum security prison for people who try to avoid taxation by being poor. You wait.
It's not really unbelievable. Now, if you are thinking about renouncing, I've got to recommend, that, John really understands the issues a lot, especially, by the way, we did a topic this morning on green card holders, really complicated way. I would advise you reach out to John Citizenship Solutions at protonmail.com. John and I have been friends for a long time, and he truly understands these things at a high level and is a true believer in individual liberty. Now, if you have a tax issue, by the way, if you just need tax prep, you can reach out to us. And we also clean up a lot of offshore things. We do help people with their 8854 filings as well. You can reach out to us at irsmedic/offshore for any of your needs there too. We do a lot of, my dad and I started my firm, Parent and Parent LLP. And we started doing just the toughest tax cases. We got involved in the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program in 2009. And thanks to people like John, I do consider myself one of the top experts on the FBAR and international taxation by this point, but it's taken me some time and I'm learning something every day. And I think the biggest lesson, that I've learned over the years is that our government hates us. Our government hates us and is our biggest enemy. And the top way that they strike at us is through the tax code. That is indecipherable. Consider this, folks. I'll leave you this as my closing thoughts, that the average reading comprehension of an adult in the United States of America is that of the 6th grade reading level. The very basic Form 1040 instructions, depending on the scoring system you use, is written to the 9th to 11th grade level. So essentially, we have laws that more than half the country has no ability to possibly understand. Even if they hire a tax professional like me, they still won't understand it, nor could they ever. That's what we have. And everybody in Congress, everyone thinks this is fine. Everyone thinks it's fine to impose complicated laws that no one asked for, that very few can understand. And those who understand, I don't know about us. I don't know. It gets a little much. It gets a little much when you actually understand how bad it is. And so hopefully we're getting it. What I'm really hoping is that, this is all leading to a great awakening. because many people like John and I talk about how bad the tax code is, and it's particularly bad for those people overseas. But unfortunately, most people don't know how bad it is until it hits them. Well, maybe this is opening the eyeballs about just how bad it is and what really needs to happen to Washington, D.C. The only reform, I think, is in the form of a bulldozer. Myself, we'll see what happens. This is Anthony Parent for Iris Medic. I want to thank John Richardson once again for coming through with a great presentation and great insight, sharing it with us all so that we all can be a little bit better informed and know what to do. Thanks for watching.